Okay,
We're
we
starting
are.
early, so
Yes, so I'm looking at
we are definitely live.
I'm looking at LinkedIn. I'm looking at us live here, and
Hi.
I'm seeing the captions running. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for being there. We see some people, and thank you so much. So, I am Annette Richmond, as you probably know, and this is my first session with LinkedIn Live. So, I'm very excited to be here. My
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So my business is career intelligence, resume writing, and career services, and I am a certified master resume writer. So Lisa, if you can just tell us a little bit about you and your amazing business.
Thank you, Annette, for asking me. I'm Lisa Rangel. My company is Chameleon Resumes. We are an executive resume writing company. And like you, Annette is a former recruiter that in the last downturn, 2009, started a resume writing business, and it's now been a good 12 years running. So yeah, I'm honored to be here, honored to be your first guest, honored to support you. This is really fabulous. So thank you so much.
Okay, so very cool. Lisa and I are going to kind of be here chatting like we do, often. And if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comments on the website. I'm sorry, on LinkedIn, and I will hopefully see them and we can respond to them. So I thought it'd be a nice thing to talk about the biggest sort of job search mistakes that people make, because there are so many things that they do wrong every day. And maybe we can give some advice on how to correct them. And the one that always comes to mind first to me, because I actually get emails from people who send me their resume and they say, "Oh, look at my resume. I'm not getting any ads. I'm responding to like 50 ads a day, and I'm just not getting anywhere."
Right.
And so, my thought is that's like throwing spaghetti up against the wall and trying to hope that it sticks somewhere. So please share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think this is really a great time to do this topic on Friday afternoon, because everybody's going to, job seekers are going to spend their weekend after working all week to look for the weekend, and if it's someone who maybe took some breaks during the week, they're going to spend their weekend, hustling to try to get a jump on the next week. So this is perfect timing. And, I'm often emailed like many of us in this business, I'm struggling, I'm frustrated, I'm sending my resume, I've had it written before, I've had my, college career center help me, and I'm still feeling like I'm not getting it right, or Outplacement helped me. I'm still feeling like I'm not getting it right. And I actually had someone send me 3 versions that 3 different resources did for her this week. And, she could tell she was just pained by the frustration that she was experiencing. And when I looked at all 3, one of the biggest mistakes that I saw in the resume was each of them did not really have achievements, and she had an enterprise sales type background, and there was no numeric measurement. It was very task focused, and in all 3. And I was like, you kind of, you need to bring out how well you have done your job so far, and especially in sales, you need to have some numeric measurement, whether it's the revenue, whether it's the profit increase, the revenue increase, the number of clients increase, the business line expansion, like however you did a good job, that needs to be articulated. And, and another mistake that I saw in each of her resumes, it wasn't even in just one, was she had professional summary as the heading instead of the title of the job. So that section right under their name, right under the applicant or the candidate's name, job seeker's name, is, to me and you, I know we all talk about this, right? It's prime resume real estate. And she had professional summary, there. And it was disheartening because, I wrote back in an email to her just explaining that you're not leading the reader to what you want to do. You're making them do the work, and like you're trying to figure it out. You're leaving it to them to figure it out, and most recruiters aren't going to take the time to figure it out. So, I'd say those are just 2 mistakes I even saw this week, but I see often, are just task-driven documents that really should be achievement-driven documents. And then in the spirit of trying to be general and broad, there's no specific title at the top of the resume outlining what they want to do. And, when you're trying to be general and broad, so you appeal to many things, you ultimately appeal to nothing, as you know, right? So,
Yeah.
so those are just two, not so much the job search, but at least the resume side of it. We can, I digressed a bit. We can go into the job search.
No, I think that's great.
What have you seen even this week? I'm sure you've seen some stuff this week too.
Well, I see basically two types of resumes. Either they are people who are operational, which it even could be someone in marketing or something where, they're not necessarily generating revenue and they're very task focused. I do this, I do that, I've done this,
right.
But there are no metrics. And the flip side of that is I see resumes from these dynamic salespeople and all they have are numbers. So they have all these numbers, but they don't have any story about it. So if you're saying that, your quota, 125% of your quota and you generated blah, blah, blah. Is that because of what you're doing? Or is that just because you have a really hot product that's easy to sell?
Right.
And, I always think of, I have one client I've worked with a couple of times. And one of the things that he did early on in his career was he was an enterprise sale, selling sort of phone services. And he would go to new areas that were just being developed in town and knock on the doors of people that were just moving in and say, hey, can I help you with this? So it's things like that show, what this person is bringing. I always saw that as being a real go-getter. You're not just sitting on the phone, you're really, really out there. So that's really what I see. I see as well.
Although nowadays being on the phone and selling is right. Like you really know your craft if you can sell complicated or difficult things over the phone, because that's how we're all selling, right? So
I know.
So I think that's a whole nother skill set nowadays, right? So
you think about everything. There's really at this point there is nowhere to go. There's no live networking or anything, but hopefully things are I think moving in the right direction, and hopefully.
And we have LinkedIn Live, so.
And we have LinkedIn Live, LinkedIn Live. So we get to spend some time together. So another thing, and I think you'll agree with me, is that people just don't prep for job interviews. And one of the problems, interviews now, of course, are virtual. If you're going in, if you're one of the top 2 candidates, you may be going in to see somebody in person. But my feeling is they're going to kind of stay that way. With a lot of the interviews being done remotely. When I was recruiting, and I only did it for a few years, 7 years ago, they were already moving to virtual interviews, even for local candidates, because it just saves everybody so much time. Yeah. And it seems sometimes that people they think of a virtual interview as being it's just a screening interview. So, and do you find that as well?
I mean, it definitely, I think things have definitely become a little bit more lax in general. And I think it's important, despite people experiencing, like pandemic fatigue and being exhausted and that sort of thing, to, at least when it comes to a job interview, for the most part, do your best to put your corporate front back on, to the best of your ability. But I know it's challenging, but I do see that there is a bit of a bit more relaxed of an approach than, say, maybe, pre-pandemic, obviously. But I find that, when we prepared for interviews, right, when we recruited, 10, 15 years ago, if you looked on the internet, that was like considered the extra effort, because people weren't really looking on the internet that much, then. And now that's like a given, right? So it's not about like what you can find online and show that you did your research. It's really about having the information at your fingertips and displaying it in a critical thinking type of manner, that you've digested it and, apply it to maybe a conversation or a situation. And I think that is hard to prepare for, right? Because you're really thinking on your feet, but you prepare by doing the research, right? So at least you can maybe have a moment of critical thinking displayed on the interview. But that's, I think, where people can set themselves apart, is when there's original ideas on the interview. And that only comes from doing some research, you know.
Right, right. No, I agree with you. But part of the thing I think is important about the research also is, you know, when you're at the end of the interview and they say, "Do you have any questions?" You don't want to ask them questions that you could have found out by looking on their website.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, isn't that the truth? Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
when I was recruiting and I was just the screener, I was continuing, so I was just screening, and I would always ask the candidate, because they knew the company before, you know, we spoke, and I'd say, you know, do you know anything about the company? And some people would be like, yeah, you know, I was looking at them online and I found all these cool things that blah 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 blah. And then there's some people like, no, not really. And I'm like, okay. So when I wrote up my little sheet that I sent with the resume, the people that were really excited to work there, I'd say, yeah, this person told me da 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 da. And the other people was just nothing. So, you know, my thought is being excited that employers want to know that you want to work there.
Yeah. And people, I mean, people want the enthusiasm of where but you know, that enthusiasm also, I think, needs to be returned, right, by employers. Like, it needs to, I think I try to suggest to people go into the interview as if you're equals. You know, there shouldn't be this, like, you know, we're evaluating you or subserviency kind of vibe or anything like that, right? It really is a meeting of two equals that are determining if this is a good match. And, you know, if a candidate isn't feeling that on the other side as well, you know, they have decisions to make too. They may decide not to go further, or it's not going to be their place, or, you know, even if they really need the job, they may decide it's not worth it, right? So I think showing enthusiasm is key, and it needs to happen on both sides, right? I think.
No, I agree.
I
I had a candidate that the employer loved pull themselves out because they said, you know what, they didn't have any answers for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you had that experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's the thing. Like, I think if candidates, and it's by no means candidate blaming in any way, but like, if candidates can equally take responsibility for their happiness at a job, and if they see red flags, not take it, they've avoided, you know, they may have dodged the bullet, so to speak, right? So, and I think sometimes there's a vibe that the company will make me happy, or, you know, the employer should make me happy. And don't get me wrong, employers have a big responsibility to take good care of their employees. But it also, it goes both ways, you know, like, we have to, as candidates, be responsible for our own happiness, you know, only accept what we know is going to make us happy, and set boundaries and that sort of thing. And I think if you do that through the interview process, you're essentially setting up that relationship that if it is going to go forward, it's got more of a chance to succeed.
Oh, I agree with you.
Yeah.
The worst job I ever had in my life, when I went in for the job interview, you know, I was trying to get into public relations, and I was able to get this job, but the interview was terrible. The interviewer was rude, and you know, and my gut told me, no, this is not for you. But there I went when I was offered the job, and it's the only job in my life. I was there 6 weeks. I'll never forget this. It was the day before Thanksgiving. And I called up and I said, you know what, I'm not coming in today. And they said, oh, okay, will you be in on Friday? I'm like, no, I'm not ever coming back. I swear to God, I did that. And it's a terrible thing to admit, but you know, what are some ways that you would recommend that people can, you know, during the interview, sort of get a feel for the employer?
That's a great question. You know, I like to ask the interviewer, you know, why they like working there, you know, and if they've been there a while, I'll suggest candidates ask, or I'll ask, you know, what made them stay, or how has the company changed over the years? And if they just joined, you know, what made them join? How is it different from their previous employer? You know, what were they surprised by? You know, that's actually a question I always like to ask in general, whether I'm hiring a vendor, or, you know, or I'll coach clients to ask the question too, like, if they're interviewing people. It's we all have quirks and we all have work patterns and work styles. So I'll say like, assuming we hire you, or assuming you join us, we're going to be working together. What are some, quirks or work styles that you have that I'm going to figure out pretty quickly? I'll tell you mine, and I'll offer mine up, or a version of them, because I probably got a few, right? So, and it's, it's nothing disparaging, or it's not looking to catch anybody in a gotcha, or, but everybody's got their little quirks, right, that they do, whether it's how they set deadlines or how they get things done early. And it's not for the Pollyanna answers either, but it's an opportunity to, one, see if somebody is going to be realistic with you and vulnerable with you. And two, if that quirk really is something that you guys know that once I say mine and they say theirs isn't going to mesh, maybe we just dodged a bullet there, right? So, some people are really pumped up by doing things the day before, and that's not necessarily always viewed as a bad thing sometimes, and so especially in like creative circles, and some people can't handle working like that. So, and that's just one of myriad of examples that people might say, but so I think when you start to find out how people work, and ask about work styles and communication styles and stuff like that, and get vibes as to why people stay or why people joined or how they've seen things changed, or, things like that. That's one way to get some indication of how the day-to-day culture works. What about you?
No, I was going to say that it is so difficult, and there definitely are different sort of speeds that companies run on.
Right.
I worked for a magazine. Everything was like go, 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 deadline all the time. I worked for a nonprofit, and it was a wonderful place that did great work. But I had somebody tell me once, there's nothing that can't be done tomorrow. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? No, of course, it's got to be done today. And I think there's also people, and maybe it's good to judge look at ourselves. Some people go in and they think, okay, I'm looking around. What can we do? What can we do better?
Right.
And then other people, some companies are like that too, and always encouraging innovation. And there's no, if you do it and you fail, that's fine, because you're trying. And some companies have the attitude that if it's not broken, don't fix it. So how can you figure out what a company, kind of what their rhythm is before you get there? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think as you start to ask about, challenges that they're experiencing or opportunities that lie before them, ask about maybe how the planning would work around things like that. Or, if they've recently launched something, like say you've done your research and you saw they recently launched a new product, or a new service, or they did an integration or something to that effect. You might say how did the planning, transpire for something like that? What are the first steps? If you're going to be in a planning role, who would you expect me to reach out to first? And what plan are you expecting? How enumerated do you think the plan, are you expecting the plan to be? Am I going to be dealing with individual managers for each aspect of the plan? Does it just go to one person and they're doing it? Like, you just start to get and I'm being very general, obviously, but, you just start to get a feel for the answers, based on just trying to find out how things have gone in past initiatives, and then maybe how things will go with expectations that are being discussed about in the job. And, based on the answers of, well, unless they bring it up, you probably won't have to do that, versus like, you need to take initiative and drive this. Like, you'll be able to get a sense of, who is a little bit more laid back, who is a little bit more, proactive and assertive, and determine which culture is best for you, right? And then somewhere in between there's others.
So there's, when we're talking about interviews, I think at the close of the interview, one of the mistakes people make, I made this myself, is you say, okay, you might ask for next steps. I think if you talk to any career professional, they'll say,
right,
before you're leaving, ask what are the next steps to get the interview, for the next interview. But I heard somebody the other day say, I heard this actually a couple of times in the last couple of days, that before you leave, or, maybe not the last question, that you say to the interviewer, is there anything that, I haven't addressed? Do you have any concerns or any reservations about me moving forward? So is that something that, I hadn't really heard that exact approach before, to sort of be, I guess, assertive, maybe. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think I've heard that before. I think you have to determine, I think you have to assess the situation, if I think to ask that question, you have to be pretty confident that it went well. And in a, in a factual, objective manner, not just, hubris, not just from hubris or pride,
Right.
but because I think if you do something like that and you've done well, it could be somewhat of an assumptive close. And if they do bring up a concern or two, it could be a sign that they're actually really thinking about you as a candidate, because they just want to work out some smaller details, right? I think objections come up when people are interested, typically. If you haven't done well, or you're genuinely, objectively speaking, feeling like you're not the choice, I think asking something like that could reinforce the fact that you're off the mark, because it could display that your judgment is off, that you think you should be moving forward when clearly this didn't go well. And so I think asking better questions that can put you in a better light and be reconsidered, or at least remain on the block of consideration, is going to be a better approach. So I think it just depends, because on the flip side, if you did do well and you ask something like that and you don't deliver it properly, you can also kill your chances too if you come across too assumptive, and not humble. So you really got to nail that if you're going to do it, not only in your delivery, but in the situation.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's like a blanket thing that everybody should use. If somebody has a crazy, bold personality and they ask that, it could almost reinforce that they're, a little bit, there's too much bravado, right? And if somebody is a bit more subtle in their approach, a little bit more pensive, and it went well, and they ask that, it could come across more like a consultative sell. Right. So it just, there's so many moving parts to something like that I wouldn't necessarily say everybody should ask that.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Because it could backfire.
It's kind of like signing the letter, I'll call you next week. Well, if you're not going to call them next week, don't write that you're going to call them next week. And one of the things that I have suggested to clients, when you send that thank you note, which, most people don't do, but when you send that, if you think there were any concerns, you can reinforce and resell yourself, in that thank you note. It's just another opportunity to sell yourself. So one, another thing that, and I really have to just go with your expertise, because this is not an area that I work with my clients at all. And I'm sure you do. It's a question of salary negotiation. Now, right now, I've read surveys that say, the employers expect it, but most people don't do it. The people that do ask, try to negotiate, they can often get a higher wage. I had that happen to me. I didn't ask for more. I didn't get any more. Somebody else was hired from the same job later and told me, I wanted more, and they gave it to me. So how can people approach that?
That's a great question. I think first it's just doing your homework too, seeing what positions are paying in your area, and, but determining if your skill set is above, warrants the above market rate or not. And then, your confidence in being able to deliver allows you to ask, I think, too. If you know you're going to do the job, and you're going to work the hours, do the delivery of what's expected above and beyond, and then ask. If you feel, rarely, but it does happen, if you ask and an offer is rescinded, you have to wonder, would conversations be handled like that if you were there being an employee, right? Like where it's this very absolute sort of, that's not really a word, but you get the vibe. But, if it's a very absolute type of environment, take it or leave it. If you, sometimes people are afraid to ask, it's like, well, what if they are unhappy with me, or what if they rescind the offer? It's like, well, you clearly need to evaluate if you can afford the offer to be rescinded, right? So the other thing too is you have to know your salary stats, because if you're being offered something that is at or above market rate, you also may not need to ask, and then just accept happily. Like, this is obviously a very rare situation, but we literally had someone a few years ago, and he was a tech person with some crazy obscure in demand skill. And, he literally got an offer 60% higher than he expected.
Wow.
And we had prepped him before that, because he was asking for a pretty high amount. And we said, look, if you get what you need, just say yes. Like, the employer needs to feel good too, right? About making the offer, if they're making a good offer, right? So, if you are getting a good offer and it is at or way beyond you ever thought you would get, it's okay to say yes. I think so. And luckily he just went, that's great. I'm like, fine, like, can you imagine getting a number 60% higher than your already high number in your head, and then you start negotiating? Like, they probably kick you to the curb, right? So I think, but for that, obviously that's not necessarily who we're talking about, but you have to know if what you're getting is warranting a negotiation. I think blanketly just negotiating sometimes could be in bad taste if it's already a good offer.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I agree. It's so important to do that research, because, employers, because they have a range, and the person who hits everything is getting the higher end. And, but one thing I found happened to me a couple of times where, the candidate was a really good candidate, but not, and underpaid.
Yeah.
And the often, today, everybody knows that I think it's 21 states now where people cannot be asked their current salary, but, they ask for a range. And this person asked for a really low range because it was higher than what they were making, because they just didn't do their research. And consequently, the employer thought that they were just underqualified.
Yeah, there's that too. So, it's a good thing that people are that the laws are being passed that you can't ask about past numbers. But that's the thing. The thing is that the laws can only protect somebody, so much. We're still responsible for knowing what we should be asking for. We're still having these laws passed does not relieve candidates of having, of knowing how to negotiate.
Yeah.
And I say this as somebody who, comes from, a blue collar background, and I didn't know how to negotiate. I thought, like, you just showed up to work, you took what they gave you, and, you were grateful for the job, and, and you worked overtime if you wanted more. And so I had to learn, that you had to ask, and shaking in my boots sometimes, in my heels, right? Sometimes. So and didn't get it always either, so we have to take responsibility for learning how to negotiate and advocating for ourselves. And then if we're running a team, we really have to advocate for, the equity amongst all people, even if they're not necessarily asking, making sure that they know how to ask, or they should be asking. And because when that stuff gets discovered in the lunchroom, and I know it's a virtual lunchroom nowadays, but it's demoralizing. So, let's just head it off at the pass. But that doesn't mean, but you can have a manager that sees the right things and wants it, equal pay for equal work. You can have laws passed. All that is good, but none of it relieves individuals of having to learn how to advocate for themselves. And that's, what I think we all have to do.
Absolutely. And, they have to, navigate their own career and be responsible for that as well. It's not on the employer, to train you. And it's a lot of employers do. A lot of them have, in-house training. They pay for professional development and whatever. And if you can take advantage of that, it's great. But, you need to, you can't rely on the employer. I know, my dad worked at the same company his entire life. Same thing, blue collar worker.
Right.
And, things, I mean, I know that was a while ago, but even today, the idea of being with your employer who's kind of like your parent taking care of you, it's just not like that anymore, particularly if you're moving more towards this kind of gig economy.
Yeah, no, and I come from, a family of teachers and government workers. Like, you didn't really negotiate. There's brackets and time and education merits, like what got you your raises. It wasn't necessarily like because you negotiated. So it was a learning process. But start with the research. If you get a good offer, just say thank you and reinforce their excitement. If you don't, and it's not always about the money sometimes too. Like you might be able to negotiate time off. You might be able to negotiate better benefit packages. You might be able to negotiate, tuition reimbursement if that's important. You may be able to negotiate certain transportation perks or work from home perks or equipment at home that isn't part of the normal, situation. And so, there's so many different ways to make sure that that's, worthwhile, right? Gym memberships or, things like that, that when you start adding up all those perks, it's a few $1,000s, to your, income if you were paying for it and if you were, paid the money and having to pay for the perks. So, there's often different ways of doing things. So, but I think that the key is to start out with the research and know when it's right to ask. And then, in terms of how to ask, it's less about, it's not an I deserve it thing, right? It's really like, here's the stats, here's what I'm going to do, and here's the ROI, for what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
And so based on what you need me to do, this is going to make the company X, or this is, a time saver of X, if you're in more operations or that sort of thing, then you're looking at what you're asking for is going to bring a savings or a revenue generation or, a labor efficiency in some way, or, whatever it is, right, that you're being brought on to do. There's value in that. And then you have to tie what you're asking for to be associated with the value of bringing somebody like you on board.
No, I agree with you. And it has to be about kind of the employer. Even if you're looking, it can't be because, I have a mortgage now, so, I need to make more money. And even if you're looking for something like flex time or, working 1 day a week at home.
That's another thing. Yeah.
I talked to a friend, I don't know, not that long ago, who was trying to negotiate, just working from home. That actually she moved farther away from the office and had been loosely working from home, and a new manager came in and, was kind of maybe back to the office.
Right.
And I recommended her strategy be to position it as how it would be better for the employer.
Yep.
If she was able to work at home, and she went in with that situation and did get that, perk really.
Yeah. And I think that's actually, not to segue into something else, but like, that's a huge topic now is, with companies reopening and companies talking about going back to the office, everyone who's working from home and wants to stay home has a leverage point now. It's been working, assuming it has been working for them, right? I can't assume it's worked for everybody, but assuming it's working, you now have a leverage point that might be worth, exploiting. And I don't say that to be negative, you don't use that word exploit to be negative, but this is your leverage point,
Yeah.
And you're certainly not going to hold your employer hostage by any means, but you have your proof of it works.
Yeah.
And maybe you propose that you're going to the office like once every 3 weeks, or you can share space with somebody, or and how it's a reduction in real estate costs, or they can take out less of a smaller lease, or share space, or and you're still showing how the revenue hasn't been affected by the work arrangement. I mean, it may be affected by just demand or something pandemic related, obviously, but when you show that the efficiencies exist and the cost savings of not as many people being in the office, in addition to there still being safety concerns with so many people going back to an office, people have leverage now.
Yeah.
To create a situation where they can have an ongoing work from home or flex time scenario. And I think companies are really open to it right now. They want to keep people happy. They want, they realize people still have demands that are beyond normal, with at-home school, or caring for elderly parents, or whatever the case may be. So there's a need, and they don't want to lose quality people because somebody can't come into work until 10 o'clock,
Right.
or they have to be home by X, or so now is the time to capitalize on that, as best as somebody can, and as diplomatically as you can.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And every study I read says that people that work from home work more hours anyway. I mean, right?
Truth, right?
So no, I'm glad that you did move into that. It certainly is true. If things are running smoothly, I'm curious to see how things are going to shake out going forward with people just moving to that, where, as you were saying, you can have someone come in, 2 days a week and work at the desk, and somebody else can work at that same desk a different 2 days a week, and to cut down on the office space for the employer.
So one tactic that we would use with clients, even before the pandemic took place, we would help people try to negotiate part-time situations at home or things like that, is give the employer an opportunity to evaluate things in a certain period of time. Like, I think everybody's, even before 2020, and it's even more so now, like, everybody's afraid of the word forever, right? So like, or permanency, right? So if you say, like, based on this working now, or I'm going to propose we do this, and prior to 2020 would say, I'm going to propose we do this, and let's evaluate it in 3 months. But you have to obviously be open to them saying no, right? But at least it allows it to be, tried.
Right.
And even now, if there's a resistance, you can say, like, I see your need for needing us to be back in the office. I'm hoping you can see my need for the remote work arrangement. How about we try this, and let's reevaluate it in 3 months or 6 months, or whatever time frame culturally your firm type tends to need to try things out. But if, like, there's a flexibility vibe that's given, then people are less likely. Companies don't want to be in a situation of taking something away from someone, even if it's not initiated by them, right? Mm-hmm. But they need the opportunity to say, Joe, this isn't working for us, right? So you have to, I think that's a way to come across like you're a business partner, right? Comes back to the interview, right? Like you're the meeting of equals, and so you're trying to come up with a way to make it work for both parties. And I think when you propose it that way, then a little bit more. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to show that it worked anyway, especially if it has been working, and it'll probably be fine,
No, I agree with you. There's so many things, and a lot of it, as you mentioned, is being diplomatic, going about it in the right way, having your stats. If you talk about, things that you've done, whether you're negotiating a salary or negotiating a raise, and say, and this is why, I think I deserve that, or maybe I just deserve that.
Right.
because of X, Y, and Z that I've accomplished, and I'm, kind of
you bring
saving
up
money.
you bring up an excellent point, though, is, when you give the range, right, like you mentioned earlier, I think a mistake a lot of people make is because they don't want to lose it, they give a low number that they're actually truly not happy with.
Yeah.
And then when they're offered that number, they're like, damn, like that didn't work out so well. So like, you really have to, that one of those like classic negotiation tactic type of things is, be willing to walk away. Well, being willing to walk away is putting forth a number that you are going to be happy with at the bottom if you get it, which means if it's lower than that, you will walk away. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people make that mistake, and then they get the offer within the range, and when then they're trying to negotiate from an offer they said that they would take,
yeah,
that doesn't leave a great impression either. So you really have to be firm with your boundaries. You have to truly say, if it is, if you're 125,000 and if it's 124, I'm walking away, then, and that might be dramatic, but you're going to be miserable at once, then you got to walk away. Otherwise, you're not taking responsibility for your happiness, right? So,
right.
So
and,
yeah.
There are times I've been there myself. I'm sure you've probably been there yourself where, you really need the job and you really have to take the job, even if it's not exactly the salary you want or whatever. I don't want to diminish anybody who's just needs to take a job.
Of course. No.
But having said that, I think it's important. People, they jump at a job without thinking enough about the whole package, and the package being, maybe it's the commute time, maybe it's the days off or the vacation time,
Right.
maybe it's the flex schedule, the benefits, whether they have, tuition reimbursement or not. And I think one of the mistakes people make is they don't really think about, I've done that myself. They don't really think about the criteria that's most important to them when they're looking for a job. And they may take, if they're lucky enough to get 2 offers, they may just look at the salary and not, the differences between the positions and what they're really getting.
The other, and quality of life is also something that can factor into maybe taking lower than you thought, right? Or maybe that you would take the 124, right? Or like, and again, I agree with you, not to diminish anyone that has to take the job, like, but that's a quality of life factor, right? So maybe you go, okay, the difference, taking something lower than I expected is that I don't have to stress about, I can get paid to look for a job while I work, I can at least look for a job in my off hour, right? And I'm getting paid to look for a job. If you end up making concessions, I think it's really important, and this may sound a little woo-woo, but like, I think it's really important to write like a gratitude list as to why you are grateful for the job in its imperfect form, right? Because no job is perfect.
I love that.
I mean, I remember the job that I had before I started Chameleon. I mean, they may see this one day, and but it's no secret, I hated that job. But I was a single income of, my husband was a stay-at-home dad, and we had 2 little kids, and I would say to myself, like, this allows me to, provide for my family. This allows me to, yes, I'm looking for a job and I'm still doing my job, right? But I'm like, at least I get to look for a job while I'm working versus looking for a job not working. And, so I would find ways, to be grateful for the job. So then I wasn't miserable. And frankly, then when you're not as miserable, you actually interview better, right? But the other thing too is eventually from that job, I was laid off, and that was a blessing in disguise. And I found being, at the time, I was working in New York City, and then I was working from home. Well, I wasn't working from home, I was home. So when I wasn't commuting, wasn't needing to get dry cleaning, wasn't like so stressed out that I was like, I had to walk to my office, and we walked. Part of that was walking into Midtown Manhattan. So walking past these stores and going, I need that purse. I'm so stressed out. I deserve it.
Oh yeah.
And you
Oh
do
yeah.
the I deserve it purchases, and treating yourself to lunch because you're stressed out, and the happy hours, and and I know we're in COVID, but like obviously all that will change. And believe me, we're all doing retail shopping when we're stressed out at home, so it's all the same, right? I mean, the Amazon boxes are packing up, right? But like
Yeah.
when you leave a job when you leave a job to go to something else that isn't as stressful, even if it's less money, when you add up what you spent facilitating your stress, a lot of times you give yourself a raise, or you didn't really take as big a pay cut as you thought you took because you're not spending all this crap that you didn't need, right? So
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
I gave myself a big raise when I got laid off because I wasn't spending on all this stuff I didn't need.
Before we move on to another topic, I hear you. I had the last job that I had before I was, full time in my own business. I hated that job so much. And I gained like more than 10 pounds because I would go across the street to the Wedge Inn and I'd be eating, Reuben sandwiches for lunch and all that stuff because it made me feel better because I hated my job so much. So,
right. And there's health consequences too. Which
Yeah.
is a whole other, expense bracket.
So let's talk a little bit about LinkedIn mistakes. And
right.
So why don't you start off with that? Whatever you want to go with.
I don't know. I always tend to think a little differently with LinkedIn than I think a lot of people. I tend to, and I know this isn't going to necessarily be favorable advice, but I tend to not follow or care, it's probably not the right word, but that's what's coming to mind, about sometimes the new things. Like I get immediate, like a little bit of excitement in the beginning just to see what it is, but I really go back to always the same type of functions that I use on LinkedIn, which is really just to reach out to people and talk to them offline. Use it as like a massive networking event, whether I stumble upon somebody or I deliberately go look for somebody and then try to take the conversation offline and nurture it and talk to them. And I have never stopped doing that from the day that I came onto this. And there's been groups and groups are great. I know there's different schools of thought of how they've transpired over the years, but there's groups, there's videos, there's LinkedIn Live, there's all these sorts of things, there's all types of features and new things, and you can put this on the profile and you can do all this stuff. And believe me, it's all typically good, right? Very infrequently is something like that was a fail. So it's all good, but I feel like a lot of times it just distracts from the one thing that I think is the most powerful for job seekers. And that is truly just finding people, reaching out, and starting a conversation offline. Like even if you comment, how many times do you talk to somebody offline? And I mean, because I'll have clients, senior, like heavy hitter executives, and they're just like, LinkedIn's not working for me. And I'm like, all right, but you got over 500 connections. I can't really see behind your curtain there. How many do you really have? They're like, well, I have like 4,000. I'm like, how many of those people have you actually spoken to in the last year? And when they say like, I don't have anybody, I don't have a network, my first question usually is, well, of all your LinkedIn connections, even if you only have 200, how many of them have you spoken to in the last year? Start there. And all of these features and new things, which again, all good stuff, but it typically just distracts us from what is the core thing, and that's just talking to people. And I feel like that's where most people, when they actually do it, get most of their traction. So that's more of a best practice than a mistake, but that's, to me.
No, I think the people, the mistake that a lot of people make is they kind of, set the profile and forget it.
Yes.
Even, if they have it professionally written and they may have a really strong profile, but they don't do anything on LinkedIn. They're not really active on LinkedIn. So,
or they subscribe to the Field of Dreams mentality, like build it and they will come. It's like, no, you got to work it. You gotta work it.
I see that. And, one of the things I think is something I've recently learned from other people to look at LinkedIn is, it's a big database, but it's also kind of like a big water cooler, where you can talk to people. And I have actually met people myself, and I don't know why, job seekers could certainly do this also, is, you follow people that you're interested in, you'd like to get in touch with, you comment on some of their posts. And that way, when you go to connect with them, you have a little something going there. It's not, so much of a cold introduction. And, if you do reach out to connect with them, even, till you can message them and engage with them, you can say, oh, I read your post on blah, 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 or I've been following you and I really find this or that, whatever, engaging, and I'd like to connect with you, rather than just, sending a connection request. And
without it, But I think also, like, not everyone on LinkedIn isn't working it, right? I mean, because they're working, right? A lot of times they're working. And so, we're doing it, it's business. I mean, it's fun, right? Like, we make it fun. But it's also like marketing from an entrepreneurial standpoint. But I think a lot of times if people are, unless they're in the business of marketing, or they're in a marketing position, CFOs aren't necessarily like, financial controllers aren't necessarily like, putting it all out there on
That's
social
true.
media channels. So like, it comes down to like, what's the strategy? Like, who are you trying to reach? Where are you going to find them? And of course, if this venue is how you're going to find who you need to find, by all means, do it, and do it well, and learn how to do it if you don't know how to do it. But I mean, if you are, looking for, a financial leadership role, or if you're looking for a retail position, middle level management, like, it's not necessarily going to be in some of these social online venues. It may be you use the information you find online, and then try to reach out to somebody directly, in various different ways. But it's just, I think sometimes the mistake is that we can get caught up in all the bells and whistles that these features and different platforms have. But we have to look at, why are we doing it? Are we doing it just for the activity? I mean, if we're doing it because we're fun and need socialization, that's sometimes all we need. And that is a legitimate thing, especially nowadays, right? But if we're mistaking the busyness for results, and then we don't get the results, that's when we start to, like, get frustrated, because you're like, I'm doing all this work, but it's not resulting into an interview. It's like, well, are you in the right place are you doing the right things to get the interview?
No, I hear you. And yes, I certainly, we certainly approach it differently than a job seeker.
Right.
But I think there is some value in looking at your connections and your second degree connections, and seeing, where people work, if they are working at your target companies, to use it, in that way. And then maybe be strategic about reaching out to people to hopefully connect you with someone. And then as soon as you're connected, not say, oh, can you please help me find a job? Or, have a little something there. But just because I was actually on Clubhouse earlier today, and people were talking about, those isms, and people don't want to put a photo up because of ageism, age discrimination, or some kind of discrimination. And, while, it's all illegal, but, it's still out there. And, it's difficult to prove. But I know that I've spoken to people who are leery to put, a photo on LinkedIn because, people will think I'm old or young, or, whatever. But that's such a problem, if they don't put up a photo, and put up a photo that actually looks like you, not, from 20 years ago. So if somebody meets you, they don't recognize you. So what other things like that can people, like, that people don't do that they should be doing, on LinkedIn?
It's always hard, right? It's hard, to put yourself in other people's shoes, right? Or even pretend, right? I only have the perspective of, a white woman. So, it's, so I respect all of those positions. I try to show people the statistics, right? The statistics show that profiles are more viewed when there's a photo, or so it's information and somebody can make their decision, right? I was in the restaurant business before I got into recruiting. And when I started recruiting, it was in a Wall Street office, and there was, few women and majority of men, and, all the Wall Street, New York-y stuff. And while, there was, that's the experience I have of knowing of, like, you have to work twice as hard to get half the amount of respect, right? And that's the only place I can pull it from. And the advice that I can give is, I always felt, when I showed up, they were going to figure out I was a woman anyway, right? So
yeah, right. You think?
And I don't mean that in any negative, diminishing light. And so, people have to do what they have to do to protect their hearts and their souls. And, with that being said, if they feel protected, then these are the stats for you to advance your search. And they're going to, and while you said, like you said, it's illegal, it's not right, frankly, if a place is going to have a hard time with me being a competent woman, I really don't want to be there, in all honesty. Now, sometimes people don't have that luxury of making that choice. So, but I think not putting a picture isn't going to, they're going to, if they're discriminating, they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole nother discussion that I'm not completely qualified to handle in terms of how to handle that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I figure, be your best self and attract the people who want you exactly as you are, instead of hiding to avoid the people who probably won't want to hire you anyway. So, I view it, it's like marketing for business, right? It's like, market to the people who will say yes to you. Don't market to avoid the people who say no to you. And I think if a job search can be done in that way, you want to attract who is going to appreciate you for exactly who you are. So do that amplified, like, screw them, and do that extremely well. And with your heart being protected first and foremost. I can't say that so cavalierly when there's been a lot of emotional, trauma over centuries. So I don't say that in any cavalier way, but that's what I try to advise if somebody's in the right place to receive it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You still have to be you. And, I think it's just a matter of what you said, to be your best self, to put your best self out there, and then go with that. Because I agree with you. If a business is going to not want you because you're, a woman, or you're too young, or they think you're too old, or, anything like that, they're going to meet you anyway. And, it's not like you can really hide if you're, going to be having an interview. So
the other thing too is I try to the best of my ability to convey, in absence of information, try not to fill in the blanks, and definitely try not to fill in the blanks with negative information that you do not have proof exists yet. Even if you're normally used to a pattern, right? If in this situation you don't know if that's exactly happening, don't fill in the blanks, because, and again, I don't mean this in any insensitive way. It's like, people who doesn't think it's racism, people who are experiencing sexism thinks it's sexism. Older people thinks it's ageism. Younger people think they're not getting a shot because they're too young. Many other minority categories think they're getting, for religious reasons, other racial categories, they think they're not getting considered because of who they are. And then the 35-year-old white male thinks they're getting screwed over because of diversity, right? So, like, everybody has their weight. We're not going to have a contest of who's got the biggest weight, but everybody in their mind has their thing that they have no control over that is weighing them down.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it is real. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes people perceive it to be there, and the evidence isn't totally there yet, and all you're doing is hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Now that is a hard thing to balance, right? Especially since some of that projection comes from trauma, but don't assume it's there until you see it. To the best ability is perfect, right? But because again, it comes back to being your best self so you can attract who wants you, which in many cases it's many.
I agree with you 100%. And, you can't think that whatever, that's the reason, that's always the reason. And before I ask you to, give your last piece of whatever you'd like to say, I love to tell the story of a woman I worked with when I was a recruiter, and she was a woman in her 60s. I didn't ask her; she just told me that she was, and I was recruiting at that time in the digital marketing space, which is a young industry. It's a young industry, but her photo was vibrant on LinkedIn. Her personality was engaging, and you know what? Although I didn't place her, she was one of the top candidates that I submitted. She's one of the top candidates for that job. And she got hired, quickly afterwards. And it was, was her attitude. Her attitude going in was not, well, they're probably going to discriminate against me, and the attitude makes, I think, a big difference. You mentioned something earlier about being negative and things like that while you're job searching, and, the attitude, having that positive
and it comes back to controlling what you can control. And if there's things about your skill set that you're presenting that are dated and you're not getting hired, that's not ageism, right? That's a skill set that's not updated. So a lot of times what gets labeled, and this isn't the case for other isms, but at least with ageism, a lot of times what gets labeled as ageism is it's thankfully stuff that people can fix. It's updating a skill set. It's, having a resume that isn't from 7 years ago, where it's just tasks, or saying, let me fax your resume in, right? In theory, it's fixable. These are fixable things, right? It's not saying I don't know how to use Zoom, right? Like things like that. So that's a skill set. And if you focus on what you can control, at least, I think, combined with a collaborative, solutions-minded type of attitude, you're going to get past a lot of what gets labeled as an ageism, point, because it's really about being not outdated, right? It's about being current. It's about being relevant. And so, thankfully, we can fix that, right? I can't fix how old I am, but I can at least try to come across that, I'm relevant and my skill set is what's going on today. So.
Oh, I think that relevant and, sort of savvy to what's going on and using tools. I think I agree with you that a lot of times it's just, and I think
and a willingness to learn, right? I mean, it's a willingness to learn. Like, two of us had no idea how to use this thing today, right?
I know.
Being honest, right?
We wanted to make it through. Yeah.
We're trying, and it's a willingness to learn. It's a humility to make mistakes, and you just keep moving forward, and I think that is at any age, because I see even, young adults coming out of college and they're petrified to make a mistake because they don't want somebody to think they don't know what they're doing. And they also are then sometimes labeled unwilling to learn, not because they don't want to learn. It's because, like every other age category, they don't want to be viewed as being incompetent. And so it's a willingness to just go, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. Let's figure it out, And I think that can make someone come across ageless when they do that, because that is a common fear amongst every generation, but when we make that mistake of not being willing to learn, then we get, oh, they're too young, they're too old, they're too this, they're too, they're too fixed in their ways, or, they're too stubborn. It's like, no, we're just all scared to death and we just want to get along, so.
Yeah, that sure is true. Well, I think that we've just gone a little bit over our time together. I'm so glad that we
did. Yes, we did. Oh my goodness.
Have this time.
Such a joy.
It just flew by. It was so much fun. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we just say goodbye?
No, I think, everybody's just got to keep focusing on the good news. Focus on the yes. Just keep going until you get the yes. Don't focus on the no.
It only takes one right job, right? Of all the places out there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you for asking me.
With you. What a treat for me. So, okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone who's watching and will be watching on replay. It was our pleasure to sit here and chat and have a good time today. So, thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Yes.